Thank you all for coming. I'm John Kennington, president, and we've got a lot of guests here, so I appreciate you all coming and braving the weather tonight. So I think we would have even had more if the weather was a little better. Just to start out quickly with our recorder's report to some of the interesting birds that have been seen lately, or out of range things, is we've had a couple of trumpeter swan sightings, one at Oxley and one actually at 31st and Harvard area by a very reliable observer. So tundra swans up in the Highway 75 and Highway 20. Some early turkey vultures. We had some white-winged doves that have been showing up in town. I know that they keep increasing. Fish crow, the Tuesday morning birders had it up at Oxley. And Todd Humphrey had a rock wren he photographed down at Mingo Creek. So that was a very unusual bird. No, I don't think anybody else saw that after he saw it. So. Yeah, a bunch of people looked, but and a common
a number of times in riprap in the winter around.
Yeah, a good spot for it. So.
Terribly surprised by that.
And a common yellow-throated Yahola back in, a couple weeks ago. Okay, so that is it. On any other good birds? Any Tuesday morning birders here today? I think all of our plant people, you guys are hardier than our birders who aren't here tonight. So congratulations. We scared all the birders stayed home. Julia, did you have an announcement to make?
Okay, in our outreach, we're going to have Jeff Cox doing a couple of presentations for us in March, one to the Bluebird Society and another to the Hosta Society. And we have something coming up just a month away. On the 18th of March, it's the Monday of spring break. The Gathering Place is having a big nature day. They're having a bunch of displays and booths and information in the boathouse. And we've been invited to be there, of course. We will. And so I'm going to send around a little this, and I hope it's just full by the time it gets back to me. We need some help. It's only from 9 to 3. And so we need help in setup about 8 o'clock, people to work in the morning, in the afternoon, and then take down. And we'll have some different activities that the kids can do. It'll be aimed more toward kids and participation and engaging them. So it should be a lot of fun. And so if you can help, please do.
I want to thank Julie and all of our outreach committee, because we've been working the last probably about 6 months now to put together a series of programs and recruit some volunteers so we can present programs like these. And because we get calls all the time from groups wanting us to come give talks, and it's hard for us to find people to come give talks, but Julia and the committee has rounded up a bunch of good volunteers to do this. Okay, any other announcements? Yes. Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to thank Cheryl Kilpatrick and Jim Deming for bringing our refreshments tonight. There you go. And it's about physical. Oh, and John brought pop. I'm sorry, John.
Oh, geez.
And I put the sign-up sheet back there. We don't have anybody for March, so if you will kindly sign up and bring something in March, I'll get back with you to remind you.
March 19th. I'll go over here our upcoming events. But Mary, did anybody not get a door prize ticket? Mary, could you get the bucket of tickets? And we have some door prizes tonight to give out. So.
Everyone get a ticket?
Now, the grand prize is you get to volunteer for a week at Flycatcher Trail, right? Okay, so here, you want to draw?
All right.
What do we got here? So we've got 130782. Okay, well, up on the table we got, so you pick out what you want. You get first choice. So we got some scissor tail note cards, a T-shirt, a hat, and some Oklahoma Tulsa County date guides for birds. Okay, 130799. Okay. 130787. And 130794.
Mine.
Okay,
They got it.
you got a date guide coming. You get one more there. And 784. Okay, there's one date guide left up there, so you, okay, well, thank you guys. Congratulations. You all have to come volunteer next week at Flycatcher Trail. Okay, let's see, our upcoming events are, hopefully, maybe later this week, we'll be having a woodcock watch out at Oxley. The woodcock have been filtering in. There's been some seen in the last week or two at Oxley, but we've seen one, or maybe just one. They haven't really been displaying, at least up at Oxley. And then then we see them, then it gets real cold. So hopefully, I'm hoping maybe later this week, once we get some reports that there's more than just one out there and they're displaying, we'll schedule a trip out there. And that'll be in the evening. Usually, I think we meet usually about 6:30 or so. Just right at dusk is when they do their dance. If you haven't ever seen a woodcock do its display, it's really cool. The woodcocks, they come out into a clearing. They usually are on that flow line next to the entrance road to Oxley is one of the places that we usually see them. And the birds come out and they do their painting, go beep, beep, beep. And then they dance around the ground and they fly up in the air and twirl around and whistle, and it's a really cool thing to see. So, and it's right at dusk, and then it lasts for about, maybe they do it for about 10-15 minutes and then it's over. So watch the webpage and our Facebook for when we do that. We'll announce it on there. Again, we may only have a day or two notice, but if you're interested, just sort of keep an eye out on those sources. Let's see, so March 9th is our Saturday morning birders. They meet at Oxley. And March 19th is our next meeting, which is about the ecology of bees by Anna, I'm not quite sure how to say her name, but she's a PhD student at OSU and studying honeybees. And we may have some honey available too. We're hoping some local honey available to purchase also maybe. And then March 26th is out at Lake Yohola. We're just going to have an after-work beginning birding trip out at Lake Yohola. Just look for some ducks on the lake there. If the weather's decent, we might head over just hit Oxley, but we'll just bird for about an hour and a half and after work. So that's about it for March. Is a quiet month. We've had a busy January and February, so that's it for March. Anything else I'm forgetting to bring up? Okay, Cheryl, would you like to introduce our speaker?
Our speaker tonight is Bill Farris of Prairie Nursery. We were originally scheduled to hear Ray Morantz with the Xerces Society talking about monarchs, but Ray had the opportunity to go down to the wintering grounds, and I said, yeah, you have to do that. So he'll be here in October, and we'll probably have some great pictures of his trip down there. And we'll talk about maintaining habitat for pollinators in Oklahoma. Back to Bill, he very graciously, on very short notice, agreed to come over. And then not only did he come over from Norman in the rain when they were predicting, a blizzard or something. You know how the Tulsa weathermen are, and probably Norman too. He also went out to Flycatcher Trail with Aline in the rain and surveyed what we are working on out there. Anyway, Bill and his wife, Sally, are owners of Prairie Nursery in Norman, which they started in the spring of 1990. And in 1992, they were awarded the Oklahoma Greenhouse Growers Association Grower of the Year Award. Bill was raised on a small ranch in southern Oklahoma. His first interest in plants were the native forage grasses on the ranch. He was a future Farmers of America participant in high school and competed in livestock, soil judging, and grass identification contests. He then went on to study plant science at Murray State College. Bill is also an alumnus of the Oklahoma Agricultural Leadership Program and has served as a board member and president of the Oklahoma Greenhouse Growers Association. He's the current vice president of the Oklahoma Native Plant Society. And Prairie Wind Nursery is dedicated to educating the public on the many benefits of planting natives in the landscape. And that's what he's going to share information about with us tonight. Please welcome Bill Farris.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate that. Good evening. Well, I've got some bad news. I realize that I can't do this presentation. This is last year's model. Can't do a 2018. I like to say that this is actually a scene that if you were standing in the front gate of going in the entrance to the nursery looking across at my neighbor's place, this is what you see in the springtime. This is what you can have if you do absolutely nothing. There's no work involved there. That's what Mother Nature does. He mows that a couple of times later in the summertime, and then every spring we get a show like that of the Black-Eyed Susans. You know, one of the things that I always want to think about, you know, having been in the nursery business since 1990, you know, we've gone through all the fads and you know, there's so much of the foo-foo plant material that's over-hybridized and tissue-cultured, laboratory-produced plants that, you know, first thing you lose is the scent. The second thing you lose is the vigor and the hardiness of these plants. And yeah, they're really cool for a while, but they don't last very long, and usually they can't stand the extremes here in Oklahoma. So, you know, my question is, you know, why do we want to deny the natural beauty that Mother Nature gives us here in Oklahoma? Now that's hard to beat right there. So, you know, why would we want to have some tissue-cultured version of something when this is something that's adapted to live here? You know, why would you choose natives? They coexist with nature rather than compete with it. Increasingly, gardeners across the country are choosing native plants, a movement that says no to pesticides, fertilizers, and yes to biodiversity, and creating more sustainable landscapes. Gardeners are turning to native landscaping to manage stormwater, reduce maintenance, and promote plant and wildlife conservation. The other reason is the Oklahoma weather. I say Oklahoma is a two-state. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too wet, it's too dry, it's too windy, it's too dusty. All of this sometimes within a week or you know, just within a few days. So why don't we utilize the plant material that's adapted here in our state, that's over, you know, millions of years, is adapted to these extremes and can withstand these extremes. You know, the other thing is our soils here. You know, down in my part of the state, we have two choices. You've either got sand or you've got clay. We don't have much in between. And this is a road cut that's not very far from my house, but it demonstrates how these plants, that you've got 2 to 3 feet of sandy loam here on sandstone. And those trees, those blackjacks, those post oaks, hickories, various other, you know, native trees that are normally deep-rooted trees are surviving in this soil. Now, we did have a lot of them that died out during the drought there that ended in 2015, but by and large, you know, most of them are able to survive on that little soil and that poor soil. This is just a few photographs to just show the extreme conditions that these plants can grow in. That's purple prairie clover right there, and there's one of your Asclepias species. I think there's a little purple echinacea right there. But you see how poor and gravelly, you know, this is down in Rose Rock country actually is what this is. But there, again, some milkweed species, there's some side oats grama in there and some blue grama, I believe. But it doesn't get much worse than that for growing conditions. Coreopsis, purple coneflowers again. This is, nobody planted these. This is just bar ditch varieties. You know, this is a road cut going into an oil lease. And they've taken quite good care of themselves. One of the reasons why, if you live in town, that you have such a hard time getting anything to grow is because this is what the developers do. And I used to do this kind of work a long time ago in my other life. And it always amazed me why they would come in and scrape all the topsoil off and do whatever with it. And then you go in, they put in the sewer lines, the utility lines, electric, and all that sort of stuff. Underground, they bring up the subsoil, and then it winds up on top. Then they backfill and compact and grade all of this stuff and put the streets in. And so you're left with some pretty lousy subsoil conditions. And then, you know, they'll roll out Bermuda grass on top of it. Here's a few more photos of just how extreme the conditions can be for some of these native plants. That's a native primrose literally growing out of a rock. There's some more of, there's Coreopsis, just growing in that old highly erodible sandy clay. How many of you know what goat's rue is? Tephrosia virginica. This is a native plant that grows at least down in our part of the country. The light wasn't very good when I took that photograph, but the point is it's growing out of this rock. That's a beautiful plant, but if you've got goats, you probably don't want it around, because if your goat's dumb enough to eat it, he's not going to like it very well. That's why it's called goat's rue. I like to do a little comparison here. This is kind of an unfair comparison, I'll be honest. This is a builder's landscape. This is not really a professional landscape job. But as you can see how cookie cutter it is. It's got the nandina in there, some horizontal junipers. Looks like a little monkey grass and a couple of great crepe myrtles. But we do have a yaupon in here, so they did good. They did real good. Okay, so how many of you know that nandinas are extremely toxic to the cedar waxwings? How many, Ray? How many nandinas do you think are planted in Tulsa, Oklahoma? Yeah, millions. But no, they don't. They don't. But they produce those red berries, and if you'll notice, in most of the time, and we'll talk about this maybe a little bit more, most of the time they don't. When you usually hear about bird kills from, it's an extreme weather event, and it's usually down south in Alabama or Georgia where they have a big heavy snow or a big heavy ice storm. And the cedar waxwings can't get to their usual food sources, and they get so hungry that they'll eventually, they know better, but they'll eventually go eat the berries off the nandinas, and in about 30 minutes later they are no more. Compare that to this native landscape. Now this is here in Norman. It's not one of my landscapes. It's a good friend of mine named Adam Sarmiento did this job. But we've got, and this is another thing that always is a little bit curious to me. This is Yucca filamentosa, the color guard variety. So Yucca filamentosa is taken to Japan, and some years later we get back the color guard variety from Japan. So how does that work? Same way with Echinacea magnus. You know, the Germans came over here and got purple coneflowers, took them back to Germany and hybridized them, and then they send them back to us. How come we're not doing this? But you know, not everything in this landscape is native. There's some artemisias, but it's something. Our philosophy has always been to grow things or produce plants that would thrive in Oklahoma, not just survive. You know, consequently, a lot of those were natives because they're the ones that are adapted here, but there are a few other plants from around the world that do thrive in this extremes of Oklahoma's climate. But there's some agastache there, a little blue stem, the Hesperalo or red yucca, and anybody want to guess what the edible landscaping is? Right there on the bank. Well, it's not native, but that's just sweet potatoes. Not the ornamental sweet potatoes, the real sweet potatoes. But they make a nice little ground cover there. There's another conventional landscape. We've got boxwoods and some juniper, I think, there in the front, a skyrocket or pencil juniper here, and then here we got a blue atlas, and that tree in 10, 15 years is going to be, what, 30 feet tall and about 20 feet in diameter. You think they're going to be cussing the landscaper? But there's another urban native landscape with the prickly pear cactus and the gaillardias. This looks like some liatris in there. Not sure what, there's another red yucca there and some agastaches, I believe. Whoa, the Bradford pear. How many of you have a Bradford pear?
Yeah, but that's far enough away from the driveway, when it falls over, maybe it'll.
Well,
I have a chainsaw, call me.
my problem is not only are they boring in that they smell bad and they do not support any insect or wildlife of any sort, they're invasive. I don't know about what's going on up here, but we are out on the periphery of the metropolitan area, and there are places I can show you there are just acres and acres that are being taken over by the Bradford pear seedlings. They were sold initially as being a sterile hybrid, but they didn't realize that they were going to be crossing with the other. Two Bradford pears will not produce seed, but the Bradford and the Callery pears will pollinate and create seed. So you've got this really thorny, junk tree that's just taken over acres and acres of landscape. And I'm going to just go ahead and throw this out here right now. Y'all are probably all familiar with Douglas Tallamy, right? And his Bringing Nature Home. You may have heard his story where he took the grad students out and they found a white oak and a Bradford pear that were fairly close together of similar size. He put the grad students on a ladder and had them mark off a certain space around, and they went around the tree on the ladder and they counted, flipped the leaves over to count the amount of caterpillars on there. And the number was something like 478 that they found on the white ash, and then they moved over to the Bradford pear and they found one caterpillar on the Bradford pear, and they think he took a wrong turn in Cincinnati. But yeah, the bird dropped him on there. But the point is they don't support the caterpillars. And as y'all well know, this group knows better than anybody, if you don't have caterpillars, you don't have songbirds. And so these Bradford pears are excluding our native trees that would be supporting the caterpillars. Now here's an example of what I call prairie turf. We didn't install this, but I grew the grass plugs for this, and they put in the plugs, and this was put in the early summer, and this is late summer. So you can see it still has a little bit of a clumpiness to it, but that will level itself out given a little bit of time. But that grass right there is a mix of blue grama, cytodes grama, buffalo grass. And the reason why we like to recommend planting a mix on this, because depending on what your soil type is, one or the other of those grasses will become dominant over a period of time, and the others will fade out. But you won't, if you make the wrong choice and you just choose one, it's going to start to get thin and the weeds are going to come in and you're not going to like it. But if you plant all three species in there, they'll all germinate, they'll all come up, but whichever prefers your soil over the long haul will become predominant over a period of time, probably several years. But it's just an example of what it could, and okay, it doesn't look like astroturf, so what? It's perfectly fine. This is a kind of a lawn that you might have to mow. If you're really finicky, maybe a couple times a month, maybe once a month, but you're not going to have to mow this. It's not going to take near the water. I just had to do it again. Ain't that a grand looking landscape? This is a place that's called the Pie House off campus there in Norman. But you can see the color guard yuccas again, some artemisias down here, and a variety of plant materials. What do y'all think that yellow is right there? Hmm? Is it blonde ambition? No, no. We'll see some of that later. They were doing this job in the very late fall, early winter, one or the other, and they wanted a ground cover to hold the soil in place, and so all they could think of to plant was red winter wheat. So they planted that as a seasonal ground cover. So this is, May or June of the next year when this photograph was taken. But it did the job, but it looked pretty cool. Red winter wheat's not native either. Okay, the critics of native landscapes. They say it's overgrown and it's weedy and straggly. And my response is, if you don't water it and don't feed it, it won't be. That's the problem with conventional garden wisdom, what we're told. A lot of this comes about because we've got people out there like Scott's that want to sell you products. So they're going to be pushing the fertilizer. They're going to be pushing the chemicals. And they're, irrigation people want you to irrigate more because they want you to buy their products. It's very easy to get the fertility too high, and especially in an old established bed that you've been gardening conventionally in, and if you want to put natives in there, you've got to be really careful that they will get overgrown and weedy in there because the fertility is too high and we tend to water too much. Remember that these plants have been growing here without our help for millions of years. The natives have evolved to grow in the place where you want to plant them. Native landscapes are also dynamic and change with the seasons. Native plants are also a low maintenance and do not require the watering except during establishment period with any plant is critical, and extreme drought. And generally, by and large, don't require any pesticides and fertilizers. And I had a lady that was writing an article for a magazine the other day, and she said, what is one of the things that you would give advice to gardeners about? And I said, well, especially for the beginning gardeners, is to water during establishment. A lot of times I get people that come into the nursery and they complain. They buy a plant, they take it home and they plant it, they water it in, they go on vacation for 10 days and they come back, their plant's dead and they think it's my fault. They really watering for those, because especially in the springtime when we get those hot, dry southwest winds blowing up through there. You don't get that wind up here, do you? Okay. Well, that root ball, you can water it in, but until it gets roots out into the soil, the wick effect of that hot, dry wind can suck all the moisture out of that root ball, and that plant can die from lack of water setting in soil that's surrounded by wet soil. And so that's a big thing we always talk about with people that are inexperienced gardeners, to make sure that they water sufficiently during that establishment period of that first week or 10 days or so. Traditional landscaping changes the place to accommodate the plant. Naturescaping selects a plant that goes naturally with the place. The underlying principles of naturescaping is to let nature's systems work for you. We make way too much work out of this. We want to fight it and put plants where they don't want to be or need to be. We bring in plants from other parts of the world and try to change our soils and change our climate, microclimates, to adapt to the plant. It's a whole lot simpler to plant a plant that wants to grow here anyway and save you a lot of time and money and effort and frustration. Native landscapes will support the pollinators and the songbirds. Bird populations have declined. Do I need to tell you guys this? Y'all know this, don't you? At 5 to 10% per year for the last several decades, primarily due to habitat loss. I also saw an article just a couple of days ago. I didn't get to put any of the information in here, but insect populations are declining at a phenomenal rate. They're declining much, much faster than the animal species are declining. I think it's pretty obvious why. Now, am I disappointed that there's not as many chiggers and mosquitoes? Probably not, but I understand, that, okay, I was fortunate enough when I was with the Ag Leadership Program that I got to go to spend 12 days in China and a couple of days in Seoul, South Korea. I found out when I was over there that in certain parts of China, they hire the peasants and give them paintbrushes, little paintbrushes, to go out and pollinate their orchard crops because they have killed all the pollinators off with overuse of chemicals like DDT. And that's where we're headed here. Probably sooner than a lot of people realize. But, in China, they've got lots of peasants that they can hire to go and do that. I'm not sure that we can hire that many folks over here in the United States right now to go out and pollinate our orchard crops. One thing I've observed there at the nursery, and we plant quite a bit of African blue basil just for the honeybees. Honeybees are bullies. They run all the native bees off. Because I've got 2 guys that work for me, and between the 2 of them, they probably got 10 hives, and they take them home with them during the wintertime, but in the springtime, they bring them out to the nursery. And so these honeybees just camp out on this African blue basil all summer long because it never stops blooming. As soon as they take their hives back home, the very next day, then you see native pollinators come in and get on those same plants. So it's they're selfish. Okay, I've long maintained that the American lawn is one of the greatest mass brainwashings of all time, how we all voluntarily signed up to spend untold hours growing and cutting a non-native monoculture which we lace with poisons to kill plants and insects never ceases to amaze me. That's not my quote, but I love it.
Isn't lawn grass the largest crop in the United States?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a minute.
And the number one invasive.
America has over 50,000 square miles of lawns under cultivation. According to the National Association of Landscape Professionals in 2015, we spent $76 billion on turf grass.
That's a lot of walls.
Well, a couple of years ago I was saying, we could almost fix Oklahoma's budget hole with that kind of money. My definition of insanity is building a new house, rolling out Bermuda grass sod, installing an irrigation system, and fertilizing, in irrigation so you can water it every day and fertilize it once a month so I can mow it twice a week. I have better things to do with my time than sit on a lawnmower, pushing a lawnmower around. I hate mowing lawn. Ever since I was a teenager, when I had the old push mower, the 3 horsepower or whatever, I said, but Dad, it makes me itch. And he said, well, it makes you do something that rhymes with itch. Duke University Nicholas School of Environment Research shows that in 2001, Americans used 7 billion gallons of water daily for irrigation, used 3 million tons of fertilizer annually, and spent $2.2 billion on pesticides, burned 800 million gallons of gas mowing lawns. Now, you want to talk about air pollution. These 2-cycle motors that run the blowers and the trimmers and all of that stuff are the, if there's anything polluting the environment, that's what it is. 800 million gallons of gas. I come from Jefferson County, Oklahoma, a little town called Addington. They built Warrika Lake due west of Addington back during the 70s. It's a 10,100 acre lake. My first job in horticulture, never thought about this at the time, was planting the trees and shrubs around the Corps of Engineers office on the east end of the dam there. Have any of y'all ever worked for the Corps of Engineers? Do you? Yeah. Well, you know how hard it is, difficult it is to dig a hole that pleases the Corps of Engineers? But we did it down in that old red clay with shovels and picks and whatnot. We're 16 years old, we're making big money too. It's $2.65 an hour. But that lake is about 2 miles west of where I grew up at. Now this is a part of the world that if you had, in the old days before they put the lake and the rural water system in, if you had a well out there in the country that was good enough that you didn't have to wait between showers, you had a really good well. And so I kind of grew up with this mentality of you didn't waste water, and you dang sure didn't go down to the barn and leave the water trough running over and run the well dry, because then Grandma was mad for days because the water was red and didn't have enough of it. So they built this lake, and it supplies Lawton, Duncan, Comanche, Walters, Temple, Waurika, Hastings, Addington. It covers quite a bit of area down there. The rural water district runs almost to Marietta. And that's most of your little farms and ranches down there are on this rural water coming out of this 10,000 acre lake. When we had the drought a few years ago, in the spring of 2015, the cities of Lawton and Duncan said the lake was at 17% of its capacity. And they said, you reckon we ought to think about maybe rationing water lawns and maybe not think about car washes? Now, just across the river, about 30, 35 miles as the crow flies, Wichita Falls, Texas, their lakes were already completely dry. They had brought in equipment to recycle their wastewater back into the drinking water system. I wish that I had put some money into bottled water about that time, because I don't think they were drinking too much out of the tap. But their lakes had gone completely dry. Waurika Lake was at 17%, and they're just beginning to think about rationing water. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me when they're pouring that much water out. Now this is no longer correct, by the way, since the legalization. But we spend more on turf than any major legal crop up until they legalized it. There's that same lawn again, same shot, but the blue grama side oats, and but that will fill in. That's a pure buffalo grass lawn. Guess where that is? Y'all wouldn't know down here. This is on. Y'all know? Are y'all familiar with Nichols Hills? This is on the corner of Wilshire and Penn in Nichols Hills. But again, I ask, what's wrong with that? I mean, it doesn't look like synthetic AstroTurf, but it's a beautiful lawn, if you ask me. That nice, blue-green turquoise color of buffalo grass is very appealing. Marilyn Stewart, and I'm sure most of y'all know Marilyn. We had it was a pollinator garden tour a few years ago, and Marilyn was at set up with her plant material at a house in a garden where they had a buffalo grass lawn, and she said it was amazing to watch that people would actually come up to that Bermuda grass lawn and just kick their shoes off and walk out on it barefooted. Nobody had, instigated or invited them. It was just kind of, she said several people would just come up and go walk on that grass because it's so soft and inviting. The benefits of native turf grasses: it will consume far less water, little if any fertilizer, support pollinators, and significantly reduce storm runoff. Now in Norman, it's a big deal going on right now. We're going to be voting, or they will be. I don't live in the city limits of Norman, so I don't get a say in this, but I own property in the city limits, so I'm going to have to pay the tax. The city created a problem with the storm runoff because people were complaining on at Bishop Creek that the creek was encroaching on their backyards during the monsoon seasons in the springtime. So the city goes in, and they're all their infinite wisdom, and they put a concrete ditch down through there. And so now that speeded the water up, and so what it did is it started undercutting the banks further south where they didn't pave it, and then which caused the trees to start falling into the creek, which then causes the water to back up even more and cause more and more problems. And so now they want to tax all the residents and the businesses in Norman so that they can fix the problem that they created.
Sounds about
Yeah, and it's my argument is I'm not in that runoff. I'm in another drainage system. I'm over the hill, so why do I have to pay for that one? But they don't see it like that. Now then, here, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. Now that's actually a representation of Kentucky bluegrass, but if that were Bermuda grass, that would be representative of the root system of Bermuda grass, and that's why it takes so much water to keep it green, is because that's how shallow. Now when you talk about, okay, this is buffalo grass here. That's 8 feet. This is 14 feet. This is, I think, liatris, a representation of liatris. But you look at your other grasses, you know, like the big blue stems and the Indian grasses, and these, they're going down here 12 feet. Not only does the structure, above ground structure of a native grass act to retain water when it's running off and hold it back and slow it down, these roots down here open up the soil and create channels for that water to, as it's being slowed down and held by the top of the grass, where it can percolate into the soil, and you can reduce your runoff, storm runoff, significantly, because more and more of the water is actually going into the ground where it belongs, instead of running down to the curb and off into the storm drain and down into the gutter. But not only do these deep root systems bring moisture up from the depths, that's why these plants can survive out in the deserts, you know, for years. You know, I've seen it go in West Texas and New Mexico for 3 years and never rain a drop. And as soon as you get a ½ inch rain, bam, these grasses pop back and they're green, because they've got these deep root systems. But what they're also doing is bringing up nutrients from these depths back to the surface, because these root systems, they die off just like the top. They die and regrow and die and regrow, and so they're constantly working that soil and opening it up, making it better for the earthworms and the other, you know, the bacteria in the soil, organisms and that sort of thing. But this is exactly why Bermuda grass takes so much water to keep it going. So if we were to switch to a buffalo grass here, okay, somebody that's a lot smarter than me sometimes said that if you rail against the status quo without having a viable solution, you're just griping. And so we're trying to do our best to set some examples here. This is here at the nursery. This is blue grama, I believe, that we're planting here, a little patch. And so we're going to plant buffalo grass, and we're going to plant side oats grama, and we're going to plant a mix of the prairie turf as an examples of what this grass can look like, so that people, you know, can grasp the idea of switching over to a prairie turf type of lawn. Now this is a stand of big blue stem that's in it's across the river. It's in McLean County, but that's like May Avenue, if you're familiar with Oklahoma City, way south of town. But you see how pretty turquoise green that is? And then here's another picture. That's late winter, early spring before the green up. That's the same stand of grass, but you see how upright it is and how beautiful color it is? You know, got nice winter interest. Okay. How many of you been to the Prairie Garden at the Myriad Gardens? You know, that's a spectacular show down there. But this is, fortunately, I got to supply a lot of the plant material for that. But this is little blue stem that I grew. So I'm down there one day and I'm talking with the head horticulturist, whose name is Nate. He says, "Man, I don't know what's wrong with this blue stem. It's just flopping over everywhere." And I started laughing. And he said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I can tell you exactly what's wrong with it. You've planted these natives in these beds that you've been adding compost to and fertility to for the last 25 years. I said, it's just too hot for them. They're overgrowing themselves. They get weak and spindly when they get that much fertilizer, their fertility, and they just flop over." There's this plant here is a small tree or shrub, depending on how you want to look at it or prune it. Zamorpha fruticosa. One of the things that we're trying to do is come up with some smaller trees, because the lots in most of your cheaper housing additions are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Something like a sycamore is obsolete because it would overshadow 3 lots, you know, at a mature sycamore. So this is a native tree that grows on the creek bottoms throughout Oklahoma. It has a beautiful purple bloom in the springtime. Damn sight prettier than Bradford pears. This.
Kind of like the butterfly bush, the buddleias.
Yeah, it's not as big usually, and it doesn't last as long, but you know, it does bloom for about a week or 10 days, and it's a spectacular flower. It doesn't stand out a lot because it's purple, but it has those little golden hairs in it. If you're up close to it, it's a spectacular looking flower. And this is a Blackfoot daisy here. It's one of our favorites. Although, you know, it's supposed to be a perennial, it's kind of iffy on that perennial depending on what the weather is. Excuse me. Good old blanket flower, gaillardias. Okay, sumac. This is down at the Myriad Gardens in Oklahoma City. I love sumac. It's a great ornamental plant. You know, you get that spectacular fall red color. You get the red seed heads, you know, that feed the birds.
Are there more than one sumac?
Yes, there's a variety of them. We grow the smooth and the copalina. The copalina is called winged sumac because it has on the stems the little wings between